Hello and welcome to this very first episode of my podcast or YouTube channel, depending on where you're tuning in today. Today I want to share my story of my relationship with my body and food and exercise over the years. It's a far from perfect story. I've had my fair share of feeling at war with my body, of feeling body shame, of gaining and losing seemingly the same 5 kilos over and over again. And yet despite all of that, here I am now at 52 and I'm the strongest, fittest and leanest I've ever been, despite never doing anything to balance my hormones, and my weight has been stable now for over 3 years. More important than all of that though, I healed my relationship with my body, and because of that my self-esteem is better than ever, and that is mostly based on things other than how I look and what size clothes I wear. And so I guess to share this journey with you, I'll go back to 1972, which was when I was born, and I grew up in the supermodel era. So I was constantly fed with imagery of very thin women wearing beautiful clothes, looking extremely popular, looking extremely confident, like they had everything in life you could ever want. And as a teenager, I was very impressionable to these images because I was pretty lost and I had pretty low self-esteem. I had grown up in a very loving but dysfunctional family. I had also been bullied at primary school for 2 years solid, and no adult in my life had stepped in to protect me, and that had a massive impact on how I saw myself and how I experienced the world. And I remember at 19, my mum and dad separated, and 6 months later my mum met her second husband, and he moved in with us really early on in their relationship, and I didn't feel really that comfortable. So I decided I was going to go and live with my dad, and this was the first time that no one was there really monitoring what I was eating or doing day to day, because my dad was a taxi driver and he worked long hours, and so I basically did my own thing. And at that stage I was working in a pretty dead-end job in a medical laboratory. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life and I was pretty unhappy, but this idea had been sort of sown in my brain, which was that if I could be thin like these models, then maybe I too could feel popular and successful and happy, which was the opposite of how I was feeling at that point in my life. So I started really restricting what I ate. I would subsist on fruits and vegetables mostly through the day, then I'd go to the gym, then I'd cycle home, and then I might have some chicken and salad for dinner, and that was about it. And I was starving, and come the weekend, I would go out with my friends, we'd drink some alcohol, and then I would gorge on whatever, was around, usually burgers or chips or pizza or whatever, because I was starving. But that wasn't the story I was telling myself. The next day I would wake up feeling regret and shame and a real sense of failure, because I'd always been someone who, when I set my mind to something, I could achieve almost anything. That's how I felt anyway. But this, losing this weight, becoming thin, was evading me, and it just really made me feel frustrated and like I was unsuccessful. But I was determined, because I was still believing that if I could look like Kate Moss, then life would be perfect. So I just kept going on the cycle of starving and binging for a number of months until I finally sort of woke up and recognized what I was doing was really unhealthy, and I was starting to feel scared because I felt very out of control. And so I told my mum what was happening, and she was shocked and mortified and supported me to get some counselling. And so the counselling was good. It helped me sort of recognise that, hey, there's more to life than just exercising and starving yourself and then beating yourself up when you overeat. And I started to find some direction in my life. So in my early 20s, I decided I was going to become a nurse. I went to Polytech, and I was really good at study. I was the top of my class. I was getting A's. And then I graduated and started working in the hospital. But despite the fact that I didn't have an eating disorder anymore, I was still, to one degree or another, stuck in this cycle of over control of what I ate, being really strict with myself, eating salads and eating low fat, because that was the thing back then, of low fat everything, and then every now and again I would binge, I would lose control and overeat and feel all the shame, all the failure that I used to feel. And so this was doing nothing for me in terms of my self-esteem. And so after I graduated, I decided I wanted to move to the UK. So I did that. I did my OE. I travelled to lots of places. The feeling of being away from home at times was very lonely and difficult. And again, I was using food as a way to soothe difficult emotions. So I was still in this kind of cycle of like dieting and then losing control, and then dieting and losing control, and my weight fluctuated quite a lot while I was overseas. I think at one point I was about 70 kilos, which is the heaviest I've ever been, and I was just feeling really terrible about myself. But at the same time, I did a lot of things, I saw a lot of places, I met a lot of people, and overall it was a relatively positive experience. I came back to New Zealand, and I'd actually done a stint in Italy for a year before that, and I was 30. And I remember thinking that year, this is the year that I want to get my stress under control. I'm tired of always feeling stressed and never feeling at ease in my body. And intuitively I had this idea that if I did yoga, maybe that would help. And so I started practicing yoga. And for the first time, and as long as I could remember, I felt at ease in my body. And that was the very beginning of healing my relationship with my body. And so I stuck with that practice, and in my 30s, I decided to leave nursing and go and work in the pharmaceutical industry. It was a head decision. It made sense. They were always looking for people who had a medical background. It was good money. It was going to give me the opportunity to travel and do many of the things that I loved. But the problem was that I didn't really want to be promoting pharmaceutical drugs. My underlying approach to health was more holistic. I believed in prevention. Even though I had had my struggles with food and disordered eating, I fundamentally believed that if you eat whole foods and nourish yourself well, and you exercise and you have a healthy lifestyle, that you can avoid needing pharmaceuticals in many cases. And so it just wasn't really what I wanted to be doing, but I pushed myself in that direction because it solved a lot of other issues for me. It made me look like I was someone who was successful in other people's eyes. It helped me feel like I fit in certain circles that I thought were important for me to be accepted. And I actually had a really successful career in pharmaceuticals. I ended up being the head of marketing for neuroscience at one of the big companies. And I traveled all over the world and achieved some really great things. I was paid really well, and that gave me the resources I needed to live a pretty good lifestyle. But it didn't get rid of that underlying feeling that this wasn't really my purpose in life. And that gnawed away at me. And one of the things, as many of you would know, when you work in a big corporation, is that there's often events and expectations around eating and drinking. And I found that really challenging because, I'd go away for a week with work and it would be, just so much alcohol and food, and it was all on tap, and you'd be tired and everyone else was doing it. And so my usual diet and exercise regime would go out the window for a week, and again I was just feeling like I was stuck in the cycle of overeating, over drinking, and then restricting when I could be in control of what I was eating. So I never really found that balance through my 30s either. It was better, but it's still, I was still gaining and losing, up to 5 kilos on some kind of cycle, and never really fully at ease in my body. I never really was trusting my body. Even with the yoga, it would help, but there was still this underlying belief, I suppose, that if I could look the way I wanted to look, I would be lovable. And it wasn't until I became a mum at 42 that this belief really started to change for me. So I saw my daughter as a baby, and I could see how much she just loved and accepted herself. She had no body shame. She was perfect in my eyes and perfect in her eyes. And I remember thinking, wow, we come into the world with complete unconditional self-love and acceptance. So everything I'm feeling about how I should look and how I can only love myself if I look a certain way, or only expect to be loved if I look a certain way, that's just programming. And I also knew that I did not want to pass my body shame on to my daughter. So at that point, I decided I was leaving the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't want to be traveling all the time away from my daughter. I wanted to embrace this motherhood experience, particularly because I had her late in life. And I thought, okay, well, I'm home now with my daughter. I need something to keep my brain occupied. Why don't I become a yoga teacher? So once a week I would go and study yoga, and the rest of the week I was a full-time mum. And by deepening my yoga practice, and in particular deepening my meditation practice, I finally felt like I stopped being at war with my body. I accepted myself. I still ate healthily and cared about how I looked, but it didn't have the grip on me that it used to, because I knew that I was lovable and I was okay the way I was. And so that was great. And funnily enough, my weight stabilized. So after I had my daughter, I lost the baby weight relatively easily because I was active and eating healthily, and my weight was stable for years. Then perimenopause hit. So at 48, I suddenly started noticing that even though I was running 3 times a week like I usually did, and doing yoga most days, and eating relatively healthily, that my body was still changing. I felt wobblier, I had fat on my belly, and I actually gained about 5 kilos. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just cut back on some of the treats that I have, and I'll run for longer, because upping my running had always worked in the past. But I actually just ended up feeling exhausted and weak, and I still wasn't losing any weight. And I started to feel some of the same feelings of body shame that I'd experienced in the past. And it was really distressing, because I thought I was past all of that. I couldn't fit my favorite clothes. My skinny jeans just didn't look good on me anymore, and they were tight and uncomfortable. And I started having a bit of an identity crisis. So I started down a research rabbit hole. I read all the books and listened to all the podcasts, and some of the information was helpful, but a lot of it was very confusing, and sometimes it was just downright contradictory. And I also knew a lot of other women my age who were struggling with the same thing. And some of them had just given up and decided that, okay, well, this is just what happens as you get older. But I'm much more stubborn than that. And I'm also very curious. I'm a critical thinker. I love science. So I made the decision to invest tens of thousands of dollars in returning to university to study the science for myself. At first, I enrolled in the Bachelor of Sports Science at University of Canterbury, because that was the closest thing that I could find, and you could major in strength and conditioning. So I started there, and then studied nutrition and strength and conditioning. And then over summer school, I did some psychology papers, and I absolutely fell in love with positive psychology and health psychology and the psychology of well-being and so on. And so I decided to change my major and make psychology my major and strength and conditioning my minor. And so through my studies, and in particular delving into the research around menopause and perimenopause, I figured out how to lose the weight. And I figured out how to do it by creating a lifestyle that I really love, that is sustainable and gives me so much energy and vitality that I would feel really selfish keeping it to myself. And at the heart of my mission really is to help middle-aged women heal their relationships with their bodies, to learn to trust their bodies again. And I will be sharing my method with you in future episodes, so keep listening. But the message I want to leave you with today is that when you heal your relationship with your body and you learn to love yourself unconditionally, then you're free to choose whether or not you implement my strategies and lose the weight. Because either way, you know that whatever size you are, whatever the scales say, that doesn't impact your value or your lovability. And that's true freedom. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want to hear more from me in the future, hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode. Till next time, take care.